1986 is scheduled to be the shuttle's busiest year yet, with 12 flights scheduled. In that year, Halley's Comet would make a pass of the Earth, and on STS-51-L, launching in January of that year, we would carry up a series of telescopes to observe Halley's Comet, and then we would return Challenger after we'd finished our observations. By that time, the public, the space shuttle had flown so many missions, 25 missions, that the public lost interest in the shuttle program. They saw it as routine. They expected no problems with it. All of a sudden you had an airline that people could ride on safely. You know, I mean, Jesus, they call it a shuttle. Something you'd expect to get served at Burger King on the way up. And this was absolutely not what the shuttle was. It was an experimental vehicle, and we were treating it as something safe and routine. And that was a fatal, literally a fatal error on the part of NASA and the part of all of its contractors. To get the public's imagination going again with the shuttle, in 1984 NASA had started up this Teacher in Space program to let a teacher fly on the shuttle and have lessons beamed down from orbit. 10,000 teachers apply for the flight, and NASA selects the top one, and their choice falls on social studies teacher and mother of three from Concord, New Hampshire, Krista McAuliffe. Krista will fly on the Challenger on the STS-51-L mission. Commander for the mission is Dick Scobie with his pilot Mike Smith. Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Ron McNair and Greg Jarvis are mission specialists who will join Krista McAuliffe on the mission. STS-51-L was plagued with all sorts of technical problems that delayed the launch, and it had been delayed 4 times by Tuesday, January 28th, 86. And we were itching to go. We had to launch this mission that day, otherwise, because of other needs for that launch pad, we would have to take Challenger down again and delay the launch for several months. So everyone was itching to go. It was cold that morning. It was so cold. It was below freezing, uncharacteristically for Florida. And the engineers from ATK, the guys who build the solid rocket boosters, were screaming to the NASA management, do not launch this shuttle today. Program managers turn around and say, why? What's the problem? The engineers turn around and say, we don't know what will happen in these cold temperatures. And the administrator dismissed these, and because every time we had pushed the hardware it had worked, so why shouldn't it work this time? The ATK was concerned about the solid rocket boosters because we make them in segments in order to have them shipped around the country. They have to be brought together with an airtight seal, a rubber gasket that we call an O-ring. Well, on that morning it was so cold that these O-rings had frozen, and because of that, if we heat them up suddenly, they could crack. If they crack, we'll get an escape of superheated gases right up against a fuel tank with 2,000 tons of high explosives inside. But no one listened to them. And on the morning of the 28th, Challenger was given a go for launch. And on board Challenger, Commander Dick Scobie and pilot Mike Smith settled in for the launch, and off they went up into the sky. For the first 60-70 seconds, nothing was wrong. Capcom Richard Covey gave the throttle down call, a normal procedure to go through the region of maximum aerodynamic pressure. And then the throttle up call was given. Again, normal procedure, everything went alright. And on the flight deck of Challenger, Dick Covey suddenly started feeling vibrations all through Challenger. And we heard him over the radio saying, "Whoa." And then all communications were lost with Challenger. Dick Covey just suddenly heard some static in his headset and looked up at the big screen, these big screens that we have in Mission Control in Houston watching these launches. Dick Covey said he could not tell what he was looking at because all he saw was this massive fireball. From Dick Scobie's perspective, what he would have felt was a sudden jerk to the right as Challenger broke apart, exploded in mid-air, and the cockpit of Challenger was designed to survive high impact, so they were not killed by the blast. And from the switch positions that Challenger's cockpit was found in, we can surmise that Mike Smith started trying to activate Challenger's emergency power. As the cockpit separated from the rest of the space shuttle and broke apart, it would have been separated from the fuel cells at the back of the orbiter, so they would have lost power. And Mike Smith was futilely trying to activate the backup power reserve on the batteries. Dick Scobie changed the joystick position to manual control to try and get the shuttle under control, not knowing that Challenger didn't exist anymore. It had been completely disintegrated. And Challenger was at 49,000 feet when it broke apart, going uphill at a tremendous rate. And it coasted, the crew section coasted uphill to 67,000 feet, very, very high altitude. There was no way in the world that all of the crew members were going to maintain consciousness in that kind of an environment with the thin air. So when Challenger started to fall, we believe that most of the crew members were alive, but were unconscious. That all were alive, but most were unconscious. Except for Mike Smith and Dick Scobie, who, judging by the time parameters on their checklists for emergency reasons, we think they were probably awake and active and in clear train of thought until they hit the water at 200 miles an hour. And all 7 crew members of Challenger were killed instantly. Krista McAuliffe's parents were watching the launch. And in Mission Control, no one had any start of an idea what to do. Because Dick Covey said then we were beyond our training, beyond work. We were just sit there in absolute sickening, surreal silence. And around Mission Control, everyone was told, right, no phone calls off site. Everything is on these voice loops and the recorded Devis loops only. Take hard copies of all of your consoles. And we have to start getting to work figuring out what the hell are we going to do? For the first time, NASA loses astronauts during a mission. And not only have we lost 7 American heroes, we've lost a shuttle, and what might perhaps lose the entire shuttle program, perhaps even NASA itself will be shut down in the coming investigation. And we faulted these O-rings. It was discovered very quickly that these O-rings, and it was just gross negligence that drove us to launch Challenger on that day. Just plain negligence. We had all the data. We knew about the relationships between O-rings and temperature. We had no business launching a space shuttle in those conditions. And yet we allowed ourselves to believe that the shuttle would do it, that it would bring us through this. But it is not a vehicle to be pushed. It is something of tremendous power, but also very fragile. And we forgot that. But now we must continue to move forward. To stop in space is to surrender. We will never stop learning again.